However, later that day, it was announced without explanation that 7 of the 8 had been reinstated. I am confident that the committee will hear has heard further evidence on this matter from other sources. I raise it here because to date there has been no full accounting of who was behind these flagrant abuses of worker rights and under what circumstances the reversal happened. Allow me to briefly outline our key concerns and demands. Following engagements of the various allied groupings mentioned above, a set of demands grew as the crisis progressed and the focus of our collective efforts broadened. These were listed in a number of public statements and memoranda that were handed to SABC management and regional directors. While these demands and variations of them were broadly supported by numerous organizations, for the Right to Know campaign, these included: number 1, the immediate reinstatement of the SABC 8. It was clear from the outset that the 8 journalists were simply purged for exercising their independence and speaking out against the extremely authoritarian actions of management. Number 2, an end to censorship policies. We noted that the SABC was increasingly leaning towards politically biased coverage and at times actively suppressing the views and content deemed to be critical of the ruling elite. Examples include the SABC's refusal to screen Emmy award-winning documentary Miners Shot Down, and the shelving of the SABC commissioned documentary on apartheid corruption, Project Spear. The canning of critical news shows, such as The Editors and On the Record. The unilateral prohibition on SABC broadcast journalists reading newspaper headlines on air. The prohibition on broadcasting footage of violent protest. Though ICASA had found that this policy should be withdrawn, the order has been disregarded, as we have heard. And then in engaging media, Right to Know members and leaders have had frequent interactions with SABC journalists and producers covering Right to Know's work. While we have great respect and appreciation for these workers, we have encountered many instances which point to a climate of self-censorship at the public broadcaster, where certain issues are considered taboo. Another core demand was the withdrawal of the unlawfully revised editorial policies. It is a matter of record that the SABC unlawfully revised its editorial policies, failing to properly undertake the required public consultation process. It is a basic principle of good public service media practice that management should not be allowed to interfere arbitrarily in the day-to-day editorial decisions of the newsroom. But the new policy says that content should be referred upwards for approval, giving Mr. Motsoneng and others sweeping powers to interfere with the work of editors and journalists. We demanded that the new policy be withdrawn and redrafted after a full and meaningful public participatory process. This matter has been taken to ICASA by the SOS Coalition and Media Monitoring Africa. Our fourth key demand was the removal of Mr. Motsoneng. We have consistently said that the former SABC COO, Hlaudi Motsoneng, is patently unfit for the job. Despite findings by the public protector and several courts that he is unqualified and was irregularly appointed as COO, Mr. Motsoneng has retained a senior executive position at the SABC. It is a matter of public record that Mr. Motsoneng has been instrumental in purging and victimizing staff, often in flagrant disregard of labor law. We are particularly troubled by reports of the involvement of the State Security Agency in identifying whistleblowers at the SABC and clamping down on those who are disclosing details of mismanagement to the public. It is my hope that the committee will ask us more about this and that these very serious abuses regarding the State Security Agency are not drowned out in the sea of other scandals surrounding the SABC. This dictatorial management also comes at considerable cost to the public. For example, Mr. Motsoneng ignored regulations by increasing his salary from 1.5 million to 2.4 million and beyond, and hiked the salaries of other selected staff, inflating the salary bill by 29 million rand at the struggling broadcaster. It has been reported that the SABC has been called to the CCMA in 190 matters in the past 2 years. Number 5, the dissolution of the SABC board. It is clear that the board has involved itself in all manner of irregular decisions and failed to exercise its duties and provide good governance at the SABC. It is our belief that the board was captured by an untouchable employee of the organization, namely Mr. Motsoneng, and that it needed urgently to be dissolved and for new members to be appointed through a transparent, participatory process. The resignation of various board members has rendered the board incorrect, hastening the urgency for a new board to be appointed. Number 6, the removal of Minister of Communications, Faith Mutambi. During her tenure, Minister Mutambi has been directly implicated in political interference that has undermined the independence of the SABC as a public broadcaster. The Memorandum of Incorporation signed by the Minister in 2014 The Memorandum of Incorporation signed by the Minister in 2014 gave her an inappropriate level of influence over governance decisions at the broadcaster, including overarching powers to influence the appointments and removals of board members and executives. No doubt in the course of this inquiry, the committee will learn more about the irregular interference of the Minister in SABC's governance. We believe her conduct has seriously damaged the public broadcaster and media freedom, and she is not suitable to continue to serve as Minister of Communications. We believe the unlawfully revised editorial policies, giving Mr. Motsoneng ultimate editorial authority, and the Memorandum of Incorporation, concentrating power in the hands of the Minister of Communications, have given 2 individuals extraordinary and unchecked influence at the SABC. These 2 developments have grossly undermined the independence of the SABC, as well as the power of the board and the role of Parliament, and ultimately did damage to public broadcasting as a whole. We describe this as a form of state capture. Work before the ad hoc committee. The Right to Know campaign welcomes the steps to establish an ad hoc committee and to hold a formal inquiry into serious damage that has been done to the public broadcaster. R2K has been disappointed that Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications did not take further action on the SABC crisis when it met in August. Subsequent events, notably the SCA ruling on Motsoneng's appointment, have made the position of Motsoneng and the sole remaining board member completely untenable. I wish to put it on record that we have some concerns regarding the limited scope of the inquiry. The crisis at the SABC will be at risk of repeating itself if the underlying structural factors that enabled this crisis in the first place are not rectified. Simply put, it will not be enough to simply shake up the current management without strengthening governance mechanisms to guard against political interference. This must include addressing the extraordinary and unlawful powers exercised by Minister Mutambi, who has systematically undermined the SABC's independence by substituting the Companies Act for the Broadcasting Act, that Parliament reaffirm its role in appointments and removals of board members, and make explicit that the Minister does not do this at her own discretion, ensuring that the board is reconstituted through a transparent and open parliamentary process, a public participatory process to review the structures of the SABC and even its charter, and establishing measures to protect and promote editorial independence at the SABC. Lastly, we are concerned that the committee has not taken the opportunity to get input from affected media worker structures, in particular BEMAU and the Media Workers Association of South Africa. Their members have been directly affected by the conduct of Mr. Motsoneng and his allies. We call on the committee to consider getting testimony from these stakeholders. It is our sincerest hope, however, that this committee will result in meaningful steps being taken to halt and reverse the rot at the public broadcaster and hold account SABC management for their trickery and lies, and for flouting due process, defying Parliament, insulting the intelligence of the public, and running the SABC as if it were their own fiefdom and not a crucial public institution and asset. Enormous damage has been done, and it will take enormous political will to undo it. But it can be done. We remain hopeful, we remain committed to that vision, as you do, of an independent, vibrant, well-run, and well-funded public broadcaster that holds power to account, meets the needs of our diverse nation, and remains a public asset in the hands of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reddy. The document that you were presenting, can we, with your permission, have it?
You want a hard copy?
Yes, the signed hard copy. It might not be now, later on, but can we get a copy?
Yes, of course.
Chair, no further questions.
Thank you very much, Advocate Vanara. I'm ambushing, I never told you. Can we start with you, Chauke? I know that you're up to it. I'm sorry. No. We'll start with Chauke, and we'll go all the way around. Honorable members, because we need to buy time, can I limit you strictly to 5 minutes? Thank you.
No, it may be lesser than that, Chair, because the right to know that's straight to the point, in fact. Thank you very much for, and appreciate the work that has been done by your organization. In fact, that really demonstrates a citizen's relay and your commitment to the country and making sure that our democracy works and it works properly. That is highly appreciated. There are 2 points that I just want to get from you, which is part of what we have dealt with during the hearing. The issue of the state security. How far have you picked up the involvement of state security in regard to, intimidation or harassment of staff? Because that has been one of the areas that freedom of expression seems to be suppressed now at SABC, that workers, in fact, staff can't even speak freely, even to, telephonically. They need to go outside the SABC to speak freely. So that means that freedom is now being suppressed inside SABC. What is your view on that, and what have you picked up?
Thank you, Honorable Chauke. If I may, I will refer you to Murray Hunter, who is our expert on security and secrecy matters. Is that permissible?
I only have 5 minutes of my question. I don't mind to leave the rest and just listen to what you want to share with us. Maybe in the next 4 minutes of remaining.
Yeah, I did ask Cindy who's going to speak, because this is a serious matter. Now, and you indicated, sir, that you're going to speak and you took the oath. I'm reluctant to allow other people to speak, so unfortunately you're going to have to carry it.
Okay. The committee has heard of the state security issue previously. This has come up a few times in the course of the proceedings, I believe. Just to underscore some of the cases of state security involvement. In January 2014, Ellen Chabalala allegedly warned staff that their communications were being monitored. That's one instance. Bemau has also reported that Durban staff were ordered to clear out of their offices for a number of hours while state security did unknown things in their offices. The State Security Agency also was brought in to stop leakers, we believe. And then we heard, the committee also heard that that Mr. Kalata said that as an employee an employee of the parliamentary news team had her computer seized by so-called SABC forensics, the SABC forensic department. who charged that she had leaked information to the DA.
Propose that with the rest of the information, maybe through the chair, you can maybe hand over the detailed information to the chair of the committee, so that I can then move to my second question, because it's clear that you're still trying to find your foot into extracting the rest of the information. But if that information can be given to the chair of the committee, will really be appreciated. My last question, obviously, is around, you raised the issue of stakeholders, especially the workers' organizations, that they are not being afforded an opportunity. What will be your proposal? Because the committee currently operates with a particular timeline, and the issue of stakeholders, which were identified by the committee, were specifically to deal with a particular area. Now we are coming up with other stakeholders which are key role players. What will be your suggestion now that you have looked into the program of the committee?
Well, it's ultimately for the committee to decide. We are concerned that they were not included in the program, given that they represent the interests of a large number of SABC staff. This came as a surprise to us. I'm not sure what sort of arrangements the committee could make to include their voices, but we do think it's important that they are consulted in this process, especially considering that they have a significant presence at the SABC, have had significant involvement in pushing back against SABC management.
Okay, ma'am, the last one, obvious.
No, it's up, sir.
Okay, yes.
Honorable Van Dam.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for that presentation, Micah. I think part of the thing that we're going to have to do as a committee beyond just the inquisitorial process is also give a series of recommendations to the National Assembly about what needs to happen at the SABC. So you've listed your recommendations, which I think we will take under consideration. But beyond that, about fixing the SABC, because there's clearly serious problems there. Can you speak a little bit more in detail about your suggestions about how we fix the SABC?
Thank you. The crisis that we have witnessed at the SABC is plainly unprecedented. And we have said that this calls for a fitting emergency response. And that, we have said, should entail public participation. And if need be, it should mean going back to the drawing boards. The SABC was radically transformed from a mouthpiece of the apartheid government, the apartheid state, into it was a complicated process. It was not without its problems, but in many ways the SABC of the 1990s that was being transformed, that was undergoing this process of transformation, was in many ways a model of transformation. And that's precisely because it was a very inclusive process. If you look, I think it would be instructive for the committee to look at, for instance, the BBC, which is, again, not without its flaws, not without its problems, but every few years the BBC's charter is up for renewal. And there has been a process, an ongoing process in the UK of renewing and restructuring the BBC. And that, I read at the time of the SABC crisis, at the time of our ongoing protests, that in that process of restructuring the BBC, something in the region of 220,000 public submissions were handed in. Now, I think that's something to aspire to, a truly inclusive, democratic, open process of reformulating the SABC. I mentioned in my presentation that it may be necessary even to look at the very foundations of our SABC, to perhaps revisit, if need be, the SABC's charter, which may contain some slightly problematic provisions. The same applies to the Broadcasting Act. There may be certain provisions within the Act and the Charter that need to be strengthened. so that there is more to separate management and the whims of management from the day-to-day running of the newsroom. We perhaps should also look at the location of the editor-in-chief. Now, there is litigation around this, but part of the problem with the SABC at the moment, part of the reason for this crisis is because Mr. Motsoneng has such unbridled control over editorial content. And he is given the levers of editorial control, and through him, the state and the ministry are given unprecedented, unacceptable levels of power over editorial control. And so we believe that that mechanisms need to be put in place to guard against political interference, that governance structures need to be put in place to strengthen editorial independence, to give journalists and editors more freedom, more prerogative to take decisions without overbearing management and without the threat of politicians harassing and purging and threatening them. And again, all of this, I must stress, all of this needs to be truly participatory. It's a public institution, it's a tremendous public asset, and we all have a huge stake in the public broadcaster.
Time is up. I should have said this earlier on, colleagues. You know, even if your phone is on silent, it interrupts or it interferes with the transcription that is happening. So I see visitors walking in and out with their phones. Could we request that you put your phone off? Otherwise, we're going to pick up problems going forward. Please put your phones off. Honorable Oliver.
Thanks, Chair. Michael, within the South African context, is SABC the worst or best broadcaster, and why?
Sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Within the South African context, is SABC the worst or best broadcaster? Whatever choice you take, why?
In some sense, the SABC is the best broadcaster. It is the most accessed media organization in the country. It is a media staple for millions of South Africans and is the most influential broadcaster in the country. SABC management, however, exhibits some of the worst, most authoritarian tendencies, most anti-democratic tendencies that are increasingly posing a threat to our constitutional democracy. So it's the best and the worst. It has some of the best journalists. We've seen the SABC 8 appear before this inquiry. We've seen them demonstrate enormous courage and enormous integrity in the face of very serious threats. Threats not only to their livelihoods, but in the case of some, to their lives. And that for me is the best of journalism, to be able to hold power to account like that. That sort of bravery and that sort of integrity certainly exhibits the best, not only in South Africa, in the world, the best sort of journalism. But managerial style, SABC's management is the worst of the worst. They have ruled the SABC like a tin pot dictatorship.
I have looked at the principles guiding you. I've just checked that. Is it within your call to go a step further to say so-and-so should go, so-and-so should not go? Is that within your scope?
I don't see why it wouldn't be within our scope to make demands as concerned members of the public who genuinely feel that certain high-powered individuals have been flagrantly abusing their authority.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Oliver. Can we go to Honorable Koza?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, sir. I can assure you that we would like to strengthen our relationship as Parliament with civil society organizations. and whatever that you are putting forward to us, we are taking it seriously, and at an appropriate time we will consider all the submissions. Sir, I just want to understand you better. Is the right to know only limited to media freedom, or does it also concern itself with the financial sustainability of the SABC?
To some extent, the two things are inseparable. We believe in media freedom and media diversity, that media diversity and media freedom are two sides of the same coin. And in order for there to be meaningful media diversity in this country, that, as I said in my statement, is deeply unequal, not only in material terms, not only in wealth and income, but that is also replicated in access to media.
No, that's
so we
fine.
have to.
Okay, no, I understand. I just want to check with you whether you have seen the multi-choice contract, or if you've heard about it, and what do you make of it in terms of SABC future revenue streams? I must also confess with you, I only read that contract because it was only made available to us recently, only yesterday, and I became concerned about a number of areas in that contract. But I just want to hear from you, your own perspective as the right to know, since you have said, you know, these two things are mutually not exclusive.
For a while now, we have been raising the alarm about the multi-choice contract. It reeks of something dubious, and like so many deals, as we have heard in the process of this inquiry, like so many deals at the SABC, it was done in a way that appears improper, and we have reason to question many of the deals that SABC management has cut. We have long said that this deal is not in the interests of the public broadcaster, that it would end up auctioning off the SABC's crown jewels, its archives, and basically selling the SABC down the river. We certainly are concerned about a deal like this with what is the most powerful media company in the country.
Okay. No, I just wanted to get that because going forward, we need to know whether we have the support of the civil society. Finally, I just want to know, you said there are 190 cases that have been to CCMA. Do you have the breakdown and the levels and the type of grievances that are there? You may not have that information right here, right now, but I'm just saying, do we have it somewhere? And can you provide that to us? Because it will, if we do have, it will certainly help with the analysis when we wind up this process.
This was reported in City Press. I would imagine that if we consult our allies in the unions, we could probably get more details on these.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Honourable Swartz.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for your input. We just want to commend you for the work you've done as an NGO over the years, and in particular with this issue. Thank you for organising the protests and the civil society's sense of outrage at what has been happening at the SABC. Could I just ask you, you touched on the relationship between the Companies Act and the Broadcasting Act. And in our view, we're very clear on this, that when it comes to the context of the appointment of the board members and the removal of office of board members, that is determined by the Broadcasting Act, which sets out in Section 13, appointed by the President on the advice of the National Assembly. Section 15, the appointing body, that is the President, on advice of the National Assembly again. So those steps that were taken by the Minister to remove board members would, in our view, be unlawful. What is your comment on that?
That's precisely what I meant in my statement, that Minister Mutambi's reading of the Companies Act as trumping the Broadcasting Act is wrong and unlawful. We said this at the time, where specific legislation is designed to govern a specific institution, as in the case of the SABC, it cannot be overruled by broader legislation such as the Companies Act.
And this yesterday also came up when we had the company secretary, and she held a very strong view that the Companies Act trumps the Broadcasting Act. So it is a matter of dispute, but it might be helpful to make it clearer in legislation that there is no doubt, and that might be something that we might need to have a look at a legislative amendment if there is a difference of views. In our view, it's pretty clear, but it seems the SABC seems to hold a different view.
Yes, indeed. And if the if the Companies Act were the governing piece of legislation, if the SABC were governed in terms of the Companies Act like any other state-owned corporation, it would no longer be a public broadcaster. It would be a state broadcaster.
And it sets out a lot of duties in the Broadcasting Act, which is fundamental to the SABC. Could I then just ask, Dr. Khoza asked you about the 190 matters at the CCMA. Did you indicate that, could I ask if I missed the answer, could you give us information in writing on those, or do you have more information on the exact people involved, the period? Do you have more detailed information on that?
The story was reported in City Press, but as I mentioned to your colleague, we could potentially get more information on that from the media unions.
And then just going forward again, you've made a very helpful statement that will be circulated to all of us, but going forward for our deliberations, feel free, and I'm sure, Chair, you will give that offer again, as we are deliberating to the heart of the issues, suggested fundamental changes that we might consider, whether it's changes to legislation, changes to policy. Feel free to help us as we deliberate. It's no good just one or two slight changes. We've got to go to the heart of the problem. So, Chair, thank you. That's all from my side.
Honourable Mathanga.
Chair, thank you. Thank you to you, sir. And my colleagues have already commended you for the work done. Just a few questions. The first one is, you've raised the issue of those in the SABC that were purged. One would assume that you would know that those that were purged were replaced. Do you know as to who replaced them and what is the standing of those replacements?
Sorry, there were sweeping purges at the SABC over the last few months. Are you referring to specific individuals?
No, yeah, well, I don't know. I'm just asking you a question. You had people who were purged from what you were saying, and one would assume that they were replaced. Now, the question is, because we need to fix this situation, do you perhaps, have you done some work to establish as to who replaced those that were purged and what is their character? You know, so that if we finally have to make a recommendation, if indeed certain things have gone wrong even there, as to how do we correct it. So I'm saying, if you know that a good person has been replaced by this horrible person, and you know the character of this person, it can actually help the committee to make an informed decision.
I think that SABC insiders would be better placed to answer this question. There was an awful lot of purges and reshuffles and redeployments at the SABC. A lot of that was about centralizing power around Mr. Motsoneng. I don't have that many names on hand, but we could contribute to this. We could go back and do some research on who replaced whom and so forth. But it was more than just the SABC 8, as this committee well knows.
And you are aware of the court decision on Mr. Motswedi?
Yes, I'm aware.
So he shouldn't be your stress any longer, is it still?
Beg your pardon?
I'm saying he shouldn't be your stress anymore.
We hope.
Chair, the other question I would like to raise, and I know it's a bit of a, I don't know whether I'm fair with that question. As an organization, and indeed I know you've spoken about the review of the editorial policy, it would be interesting to know, but perhaps it may not be something that we may get it now, as to the right of the things we shouldn't know. Do you have those things that we should not know that your organization possesses?
Sorry, are you speaking in general terms about freedom of expression and what
Yes, yes. Not in I know that this is a specific matter that we are dealing with, which we agree with, but I'm just asking because personally I would like to take the matters forward even outside this engagement. Have you, as an organization, do you possess these things that we should not know as part of your organization?
I think we've been very open and transparent throughout. We generally like to practice what we preach, so we're not withholding any information that we think is...
That's not the question. Look, there are these things that the public broadcaster should bring to the public, and I think that's the approach. But would you be in a position to help us to say, whilst we are pursuing this agenda, but we believe that these are the things that should not be brought to the public, if there be any?
Yes, we may differ substantially over what should be kept secret and what should be publicly available. Our position is that openness and transparency should be the rule and secrecy should be the exception. But it would depend on what information you're speaking about specifically.
Okay. Chair, my time is over, I suppose. If not, I still have a nice question.
Even if it wasn't, even if it wasn't over, I was going to ask you to stop and pursue this matter offline.
Okay.
But your time is over.
Okay.
Honorable Mukwena.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. We meet again. I'm going to ask you for two inputs in sort of one session, so I'm going to ask you two things at the same time. The debacle at the SABC, underpinned by interference from political powers, has clearly interfered in government issues, in editorial bias, the quality of information that society is getting. How, further down the line, is it affecting society in terms of strengthening democracy, dissemination of information, and social cohesion, those issues? That's the one set. And then you also spoke of state capture. Now, state capture is a wide subject, and it affects, I think, many parts of society. We heard, for instance, of the CEO of ESCOM going into offices of the SABC and dictating to the SABC what they should be disseminating and what not. What other, and then also the state security involved in investigations, what other organs of state and parts of the executive should be investigated in this inquiry in order for us to get a fuller picture? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. How this affects things down the line, I think it's fairly self-evident how a compromised public broadcaster that is as important as the SABC would negatively affect democracy. I don't think I need to explain to this House how important public broadcasting is for democracy, and how important knowledge and the free flow of information are for democracy. Now, the SABC is, as I said, the most accessed broadcaster in the country. For many people, it is pretty much their sole source of news and current affairs information. And if you deprive people of that, if you distort that narrative, or restrict that narrative, or control that narrative for narrow political interests, I think it's quite obvious what the effect on democracy would be. And this is something that's recognized in the Constitution and in the laws governing the public broadcaster. Not so much in the Companies Act, which is why we say the Companies Act should not be trumped by the Broadcasting Act. But the free flow of information and freedom of expression are the very lifeblood of democracy. I think it would be hard to debate that. And the public broadcaster has a role to inform people, to facilitate the free flow of information, to tell the stories of South Africa and South Africans in all their diversity, and to encourage and promote freedom of expression. So it has a very critical place in our democracy. In terms of state capture and what other organizations should be investigated, we've mentioned state security, the role of state security. We think that's very concerning and would like to see that given a prominent place in the deliberations of this inquiry. We would like very much for the inquiry to really take into account how serious this is, to have the spooks snooping around our state broadcaster and intimidating journalists. Of course, this will have a chilling effect on journalism in South Africa, on journalists whose sources may very well be at risk. I was asked earlier about what information can justifiably be withheld or kept secret. I may have misunderstood the question somewhat, but one thing that does need to be kept secret in the interests of journalism and democracy is sometimes sources need to be protected, and particularly whistleblowers. We've seen what's happened to members of the SABC 8 who came out and took a stand, and we've seen that some of them have had very serious threats on their lives. And so to have spies snooping around the SABC, we think is a very worrying sign. We don't know what information they were looking for. We heard the report, I think it was by Mr. Kalata, who said that a parliamentary reporter's computer was confiscated. And of course she would have had very sensitive documents on there. She would have had sensitive information that certainly shouldn't end up in the possession of spies. Most importantly...
Thank you, sir. Honorable Kwankwa.
Well, thank you very much, Chairperson. Firstly, kudos to you, my fellow countrymen and women. I think you're doing an excellent job. I have participated in one or two of your demonstrations, the last one obviously being the C.1 for me. I was very happy to hear you right at the beginning to admitting and acknowledging the fact that the problems at SABC extend beyond the protest policy. I think the protest policy, as you rightly said, is a symptom of an underlying problem at SABC. There are fundamental problems that need to be addressed in order for us to get the SABC working again, in order for the principles of good journalism to take root in that institution.